What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Week 12 edition of the Pro Football Focus Show here on RotoGrinders. We have a blast from the past. Daniel Kelly was not able to be with us this week. He had some issues he had to attend to, so he picked up the bat signal. Really, he just sent an email at PFF, and we got our old friend, Mr. Scott Barrett, back with us this week. Scott, my dude, what is up?
It feels good to be back, I have to say. This feels right.
I miss the bed, right? It looks like you've cleaned your act up a little bit here. You're a little more professional. You've moved to Texas, right? You got a lot going on in your life, dude.
That's right. I have an apartment, not just a room with a bed and a computer and nothing else. It's nice.
Yeah, living the dream. So they're working you really hard. You even had to pull some strings, or we had to, just to get you on the show, because you're not just doing your work, you're doing some work for Dan. You're a busy man this week, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I had to pick up some slack for Daniel, just also my typical obligations, but I wouldn't miss this for the world. My triumphant return to the RotoGrinders show.
Yeah, are we still allowed to hashtag dank stats if we moved away from that, or are we still allowed to have that as a brand?
That's still the brand for sure.
All right, yeah, we'll work some of those in and we'll have some fun. So Daniel's article, we always started out here with kind of the look back at what can we learn from the week before, and he didn't have that this week. He's got the week off from Pro Football Focus, but we've got Scott's article here about the fantasy football stats you need to know from week 11, which is sort of the same thing. And we got a good one and a bad one, and a bad one's going to tie into a segment we're going to talk about in a second. But let's talk about sort of, what we've known in fantasy for a while. It's sort of like this Konami code quarterback. I got a little bit of that last week from a Jeff Driscoll, I guess, if I want to toot my horn on that. It worked out pretty well for me. But just how good are these rushing quarterbacks in football now for us?
Yeah, so Rich Rebar coined the term Konami code, I think, back Tebow's rookie season. But one of my best calls of the offseason was this would be the year of the Konami code. I said the single best value in all drafts was Lamar Jackson. The second best quarterback value in all drafts is Dak Prescott. And if you look at the numbers, Lamar Jackson leads all quarterbacks in rushing attempts, then Josh Allen, then Kyler Murray, then Deshaun Watson, then Russell Wilson. And all these guys rank, top 8 in fantasy points per game. Kyler Murray's on pace for the second best rookie season ever. Look back at Josh Allen's last 16 games, would have ranked top 3 in any of the last 7 seasons. Jackson's on pace for the greatest fantasy quarterback season all time. And this is something that's been true on DraftKings for at least 3 or 4 years. I've been writing about it, is that they just severely underprice mobile quarterbacks, and those are the guys you really want to look at for cash games.
Yeah, Tom Brady's throwing the ball a bunch. Phillip Rivers is shot putting balls all over the football field. And if you ain't running in 2019 as an NFL quarterback, at least for fantasy, you're really not getting it done. And we just see these guys have big floors, big ceilings, and it doesn't even matter. You pull Jeff Driscoll out of nowhere and you can get 20-plus fantasy points out of him. So that's something I certainly agree with, and we'll talk about that a little in some of the plays. The other thing we want to talk about is, the non-Konami code Jared Goff, just how awful, what has happened to this Rams offense, right? It looks like Brandon Cooks might be coming back too, but this contract of Gurley, the contract of Goff, all these trades they made, I understand what they did. They went all in to try to get, around Goff because they thought they had a good enough core. But I think the Rams are going to regret that. Basically, they're already regretting all this stuff.
Yeah, so that's definitely true. Didn't look like a great contract at the time, and now, of course, looks significantly worse. Over his last 18 games, you want to include the postseason, he has a comparable passer rating to Brock Osweiler. What's the cause of that? There's a lot of things. Brandon Cooks missing time with a concussion. Robert Woods was out last week. Teams selling out to stop Cooper Kupp. But the big issue, I think, is he just is one of the most pressure-sensitive quarterbacks in the league, and this has been true since his rookie season. Just significantly worse under pressure as opposed to operating from a clean pocket. And you and I were talking before the show that this line, the Ravens are only 3-point favorites on the road. This line is either like the best trap ever, or it's one of the worst lines since probably week 1 of last season when the Raiders were favored against the Rams. But this, look at the Ravens since getting Marcus Peters. They rank second best in points allowed per game. They rank second best in opposing passer rating. Like we just said, Jared Goff's been Brock Osweiler levels of bad. So I have a hard time imagining that the Ravens don't win by more than 3. And I think odds are good. We're going to see Robert Griffin III in the fourth quarter for the 3rd week in a row.
Yeah, we always like to mix in a little sports betting this year because it's sort of becoming nationwide. They just passed the bill in Colorado. They're already like, hey, emergency meeting. We've got to have sports betting as soon as possible. It's sort of picking up. So we always like to work it in. We both had the exact same one. So we both think that Baltimore -3, if you can get that out there and you're looking to place some bets, we both like that one. What I want to remind you guys to do, if you are watching on YouTube or if you're on the RotoGrinders page, click the like and subscribe. The like button boosts us up the rankings, lets other people find us easily. And then if you subscribe, you'll get notifications every single time a RotoGrinders show goes live. And it just helps us out behind the scenes, get a little bit more, notifications and all that type of stuff out there on the internet. So if you're watching out there, please give us a thumbs up on the YouTube. All right, so we talked about our bets. Let's jump into the Thursday slate real quick. Some of these people download the podcast. Some of us are watching live, and they're going to want to know how to play Showdown tomorrow night. So we've got Indy and Houston, a short week for both. It looks like T.Y. Hilton might be coming back in this one too. Do you have any DFS takes or what we should take away from here from this game?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I've given this game probably zero thought from a DFS perspective. Mm-hmm. All I'm going to say is that look for Deshaun Watson to rebound off of his career worst game, especially if Will Fuller plays. He averages about 3.9 fantasy points per game more when Will Fuller's active throughout his career. The other thing I'll add is I think, assuming Jordan Wilkins plays, I think he's the running back to own for season long, to play for DFS. I know, Jonathan Williams had quite the game, but I still think that's Jordan Wilkins, who's immediately behind Marlon Mack on the depth chart. And just know, they're coming off of a perfect matchup against the league's worst run defense and Jaguars. So in either case, I wouldn't look for some massive 200 rushing yard game like we saw last week.
If Hilton plays in this game, would you expect him to be a full go? It's not indoors in Indianapolis, but it's still indoors in Houston. We like him on the fast tracks, things like that. If he starts, I'm expecting him to be a full go with no restrictions. And I don't know. I'm kind of expecting him to have a pretty big game here.
All I'll say is Houston's secondary isn't good, but in terms of translating to fantasy points, they only ranked 12th in schedule adjusted fantasy points per game. No, he's banged up. But at the same time, if Jacoby Brissett has some success passing the ball, I think he's going to have to, given game flow. I don't know who else, succeeds, because Eric Ebron's not getting it done. Jack Doyle's not doing anything. The other wide receivers, no one to get excited about.
All right, let's jump into some plays for this week. And we'll start at the quarterback position. You remember how this goes, right, Scott? So everybody's going to be playing Matt Ryan. Let's sort of talk about him a little bit here. He's home. He's in a dome. He's got the Tampa Bay pass defense. I pulled up some grades on PFF. They're 27th in pass coverage grade on the season, 26th in pass rush grade on the season, right? So they're not really good covering. There's not a lot of pass rush. While also allowing the most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season and the most fantasy points to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks. It takes a little salary manipulation to be able to pay up $6,700 for Matt Ryan, but I actually think he's a little too cheap. You got to expect he gets that 300-yard bonus. That defense is playing pretty well here. Do you have any reason to not want to use Matt Ryan in DFS this week?
No, I don't think so. So last time I checked, and this is at least 2 weeks ago, but Matt Ryan ranked second in DraftKings fantasy points per game and second in DraftKings fantasy points per game at home over the past 2 seasons, which I thought was, super surprising given some of the other names you'd expect at the top. Maybe Lamar Jackson didn't qualify or whatever, but just a really safe bet to hit that 300-yard bonus. And yeah, like you said, Tampa Bay hemorrhaging fantasy points. They also rank 4th worst in opposing passer rating, I think 5th worst in fantasy points per dropback. I think he's definitely mispriced, and I think he's a great play, but at the same time, he is going to be chalk.
Yeah, we've got him projected as, let's see here, looks like the highest owned quarterback of the week at 15%. So you would be correct that he would be chalk. If you aren't playing Matt Ryan, let's say we want to get a little different in DFS tournaments, that's always a good thing. Those low-owned quarterback, low-owned wide receivers, if you're playing those really large field tournaments, that's sort of how to boost your way up. You got anybody for me?
I think a lot of people are going to consider running it back with Jameis Winston. If you look at season-long averages, you're going to see, Atlanta ranks not too far behind Tampa Bay in terms of, badness. But what's really interesting is, so since their bye, Dan Quinn has given up on play calling duties. And in that time, Atlanta has 11 sacks, 4 interceptions. They're giving up just 6 points per game to opposing offenses. So just dramatically better. And, we know Winston is like the most high variant quarterback in the league, could throw 4 picks, could throw 4 touchdowns, never really know with him. So that might be a mistake. And, if Winston has one of those bad games, maybe the play is, Brian Hill a week later than everyone thought. As far as other quarterbacks are concerned, I'm not sure. I just haven't really looked that deep into it just yet.
Let me throw. How about we run it back with Jeff Driscoll? How does that sound? I used him last week at 4,600. Right, I like that price. It's 5,500 this week, and I think if you're playing the $5,500 quarterback game, right, I think a lot of people are going to be going to Wentz, who's 5,600, and Wentz is going to eat up a lot of ownership. And I like Wentz a little bit too. But, we like those Konami code quarterbacks. Carson Wentz has a little bit of it, but he's not Jeff Driscoll in the running department. Driscoll could easily get, 250, throw for a touchdown or 2 against Washington. Sam Darnold, I don't think is that amazing. He just lit up this Washington team that's completely tanking, in my opinion. He's what I really like about Driscoll, right? He's got Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones and TJ Hawkinson and Amendola, and he's got a couple pass-catching running backs that maybe they have a running game in Bo Scarborough now. I don't really know about all that. But how about Driscoll as a swerve off what I think is going to be a little bit higher on Carson Wentz?
So if you played him last week, that was a fantastic call, and just props to you. Pat yourself on the back. It was good, post hindsight, good probably pre hindsight. The one thing I'll say with Driscoll regarding the Konami code is he didn't really run at all in college, but at the same time, in this 2-game sample, we have 37 rushing yards and we have 51 rushing yards and a touchdown. The matchup looks good on paper. The thing about Washington is teams are running on Washington because they don't really need to pass. But when they pass, they're hyper efficient. Look at Washington. They rank, bottom 6 in yards per attempt allowed. They rank bottom 4 in fantasy points per dropback allowed, bottom 5 in opposing passer rating. And look at Detroit, Bo Scarborough. Do you really trust him? I'm more inclined to think they don't really have a run game, and their defense hasn't been good. Sorry, Matt Patricia. There is a chance that they are forced to pass, and like you said, he's definitely at least a little too cheap.
Yeah, one of the things I like too is the Redskins. They had their back-to-back lowest coverage grades of the season on PFF as a team versus the Jets and the Bills. These aren't like world beat. John Brown's a good receiver, right? And Jamison Crowder, he's okay at what he does. But for those to be your worst coverage grades of the season, I think that tells you something where this Washington team's sort of headed. So I think some of those guys in the secondary just really don't care anymore, and they're just letting dudes kind of run all over the field on them. So, you let Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones get open, they're probably going to catch a couple touchdowns against you. So I think that's pretty interesting to run it back with Driscoll. Another guy I wanted to mention Winston too, that defense for Atlanta. It's sort of tightened up quite a bit. So I'm glad you were able to get your take on that. And then let's talk Carson Wentz, who's still probably not going to have Deshaun Jackson. I haven't checked the status of Alshon Jeffrey. Let me see. He did individual work on the side. So as we record this on Wednesday night, I don't know if we really think Alshon Jeffrey's going to end up playing. Is Dallas Goedert, is Zach Ertz, a bunch of scrubs on the outside. You've got a pass-catching running back in theory and Miles Sanders. Is that enough to get it done against Seattle?
Yeah, I don't think it is. So 2 weeks ago, he ranked second among all quarterbacks in PFF grade. Now he's dropped down to 11th. But at the very least, he's playing a lot better than his numbers imply. The issue is he has one of the worst receiving cores in the NFL. And I don't want to say worst because it's not. It's just like the most one-dimensional. There's just absolutely zero speed on that offense. And, defenses are like, all right, let's sell out to stop Zach Ertz. And then, the end. And it's been working. So he's not someone I'm too interested in for sure.
All right, let's move on. I'll save it for wide receivers. I don't want to give everything away here. So I've got another quarterback I might be interested in, and it's more there's a lot of matchup in some of the receivers we're in. But let's move to running back, and I think let's start with some of the chalkier plays of the week. So if I pull up our projected ownership here on RotoGrinders, I go to running backs. On the first run through, we have Le'Veon Bell as the highest owned running back at 6,400. I'm going to take the under on him being the highest owned running back. He's not very efficient. Oakland's decent against the run. You can pass on him. That offensive line is absolutely trash. I'm not really on Le'Veon Bell. Do you have a strong take on that? These ownership projections they're basically the algorithm takes over, and there's not really a lot of manual tweaks this early.
So I will say he's, egregiously mispriced based on volume, but that's been true all season, and he's not always, return value in spite of it. Oakland is good on the ground, but they're pretty susceptible to pass catching backs. They're giving up the fifth most receiving fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. But still, Le'Veon Bell isn't really getting the usage I think he deserves, but he does rank third among all players in expected fantasy point market share. So if you think the Jets do better than expected, he's the one you want to play. He's like a Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette's again.
I'd take Fournette in a heartbeat. I think Fournette actually has good players and I think a reasonably good offensive line as well.
So I like Fournette more than Bell, but yeah, he's mispriced too. And it's the same thing where it's like huge value based on volume. But for whatever reason, it's not translating into fantasy points. Bell's, I think, is more coaching, frustrating coaching than anything. Fournette is kind of just bad touchdown luck. And typically we do see that regress in season. So he'd be the one I'd want to bet on.
Yeah, Fournette, he's a little bit of a squeaky wheel. The coach even said I should have gotten him the ball more last week. And that was a franchise low rushing attempts for the Jaguars last week as well. So don't expect that type of performance. And even on that, 12.7 DraftKings points. I mean, it didn't absolutely kill you. Sure, it wasn't ideal, but when a team runs for the lowest amount of times in franchise history and the running back gets you almost 13 DraftKings points, I mean, that tells you where your floor is with Leonard Fournette, and I think he's due for a pretty good game this week as well. A couple other guys, let's kind of hash this out with Christian McCaffrey. So I was able to fit him. Why did I play Driscoll last week? I wanted to play Christian McCaffrey and Michael Thomas, and that was how I decided to come up with it. So all that ended up working well for me on my teams that happened in. My question to you is, does defense matter, Scott? Because if there is a defense that matters, it's sort of the Saints. They don't really let any running back do anything. We saw last week McCaffrey, right? The rushes didn't go his way, but he got 14 targets in the passing game. Just an absolutely game script proof, every snap running back. The problem is we have Alvin Kamara $2,700 cheaper on DraftKings this week. So is McCaffrey worth that price bump to you?
So what's interesting about McCaffrey is, in spite of putting together what's the greatest probably the third greatest fantasy season all time at worst, is he actually has been sort of sensitive to matchups, where his 3 worst fantasy games of the season all came against his 3 toughest matchups. And New Orleans is a tough matchup on paper. He struggled against them to some degree, at least last year. It looks like 53 rushing yards and 15 carries, 67 yards and 11 targets. No touchdowns except for the one he threw. But at the same time, it's Christian McCaffrey putting together a top 3 fantasy season all time. Even in those bad for him games he had, he still, finished top 4, top 7 at the position. And he's 10,500. But if you look at DraftKings fantasy points per game per $1,000 of salary, he's still the most valuable running back. He's smashing everyone in volume. I think you still play him. Yeah, and I think even though the matchup's bad, he's still going to see that just means he's going to see more targets.
Yeah, I think, completely matchup proof. I agree. But the thing I'm running into with this might be the first week I think that McCaffrey's been on the main slate that I might not play him on my cash teams. And I think that's because Kamara is in such a good spot at 8,200, right? So I saved $2,700. Would you rather play McCaffrey and a middling wide receiver or Kamara and Michael Thomas at home against Carolina? So that's sort of where I'm leaning. If you play McCaffrey, it's a little tougher to get Michael Thomas, but Kamara's been absolutely nuts these past couple of weeks. Carolina's 15th in rush D grade at Pro Football Focus, but they were giving it up to running backs for the last 5 weeks. I know Brian Hill stunk and the whole Atlanta run game stunk, but they still let up a rushing touchdown to Quadre Olison. He's got 20 targets in 2 different game scripts, right? One game they won, one game they lost. He's back. He's got Breeze under center. He's got the dome splits going for him. 3 yards per reception higher at home. We know Breeze has all those home splits as well. So I'm really going against. I've been joking for the past couple of weeks, right, about the optimizers, right, the optimal lineups when you click it, and it just doesn't put Christian McCaffrey in the lineup for you automatically. I've been joking about that. But I think I'm going to make the joke to myself this week. I don't know if I'm going to have that Christian McCaffrey. I think Kamara looks really good.
Yeah, the one thing I'll just say about him is he's had 17 carries the last 2 weeks to Latavius Murray's 15, and Carolina is giving up the most fantasy points per game to running backs on the ground, but through the air, they rank 4th best. So it could be, hypothetically a Latavius Murray game if such a game exists. With Kamara active, but I think I'm just going to roll with McCaffrey. He's just crushed every single week for me, and it's just been so easy as a fantasy analyst to just say, just keep playing this.
Can't be wrong.
Until it stops working. Yeah.
If you don't want to be wrong, you just play Christian McCaffrey. 2 other guys I want to mention. I got Nick Chubb. Right, we've got this Kareem Hunt stealing all of his passing work. Do you think that makes it so we can't play Nick Chubb? He's 8,100 on DraftKings, right? So when you get into the $7,000 running backs, once you get into that and you're not involved in the passing game, I really am hesitant. But in theory, the nut matchup at home against Miami, the problem with Chubb, right? Even if he gets 100 yards at 8,100, he has to get a touchdown, I feel like, because he's just not getting anything in the reception game.
So I wrote about this in the XFP expected fantasy points column this week. And so since Kareem Hunt has returned from suspension, he ranks 12th in XFP among all running backs because targets are valuable. But Chubb ranks 2nd among all running backs. And over this span, he's seen 87% of the rushing XFP, 25% of the receiving XFP, and 97% of the team's XTD, which is expected touchdowns. So what does that mean? It just means he's still glaringly the team's early down workhorse and goal line back. And this is the week for it. They're 10.5 favorites. Miami's run defense sucks. And they're projected to score 8.1 points above their per game average this year. And the offense runs through Chubb. So I think he's a top play for sure.
I want to remind everybody about our single entry series we have going on FanDuel. If you like fair playing fields, you can win a trip to their fantasy football world championship in Puerto Rico. You don't compete for their big prize, but you get a little bit of an ancillary prize pool with just a real small field. Make sure to check that out on FanDuel in their lobby. Final running back I want to talk to you about is Derrick Henry. So I never played Derrick Henry in cash because, I mean, he's another guy. He needs the touchdown, or he needs to catch, one of his 2 targets on a screen pass, run over 3 dudes, and then outrun everybody to the end zone, right? He does that a couple times a season, but that has to happen for it in the passing game. But he's off bye. He's facing Jacksonville. A whole bunch of nobodies ran for 264 yards and 3 touchdowns against Jacksonville last week, along with 4 more receptions. The Jags are allowing the 3rd most rushing yards, the 3rd highest rushing success rate against, and the 6th most expected points added on rush attempts. They've also allowed the 5th most running back fantasy points over the past 4 weeks, and that's with a bye. Derrick Henry looks like an ultimate tournament play to me this week.
Yeah, I even think he's kind of the cash play. And you know me, like I only want to play those bell cows who aren't game script sensitive in cash, but this is just such the smash matchup.
Would you play him over? I would almost play Derrick Henry over Le'Veon Bell straight up this week. He's 500 more on DraftKings, but if I was going to play Bell in cash, I would 500 to get Henry.
Yeah, so last week Henry totaled 188 yards and 2 touchdowns on 23 carries against the defense that ranks 2nd worst in yards per carry allowed. Now they get the defense that ranks worst in yards per carry allowed. And since week 5, they're giving up 6.21 yards per carry on the ground. We know Tennessee's offense runs through Derrick Henry. It just seems like the ideal matchup.
Yeah, Derrick Henry in a GPP, and if you're thinking about Bell, maybe think twice and maybe try to use Derrick Henry. All right, Scott, you mentioned your expected fantasy points column. If you got your PFF subscription, right, you should know by now to read through this every single week. I've got it pulled up on the screen here. Pick a couple of dudes. You want to talk about DJ Chark and his 15 targets from last week? Now, I think the game script certainly went a little in his favor, and we already mentioned, right, they completely abandoned the run. But Nick Foles, right, it seems like, we went in, hey, D.D. Westbrook in the slot. That's what Nick Foles likes. And some of us got tricked, me, myself included, in a couple of lineups last week on that. But Chark looks like he's legit.
Yeah, so I think that's the big takeaway. We were questioning if he's a real wide receiver 1 because, the volume didn't match his production. But that's not the case anymore. Since week 5, he ranked 6th among all wide receivers in XFP per game. And then we were worried heading into last week. Well, there's a change in quarterback. And then what happens? He sees his best volume of the season, led the position in XFP last week. Only Christian McCaffrey ranked higher. He's a wide receiver 1. You got to treat him like that, though I know FanDuel is not in terms of salary.
Let's talk DJ Moore too. I think he's been really interesting for a while because DraftKings has kept him underpriced. They juiced it up a little bit. I think he's like 6,400, but his route tree fits the Kyle Allen throwing capabilities. And that's why DJ Moore has 3 straight double-digit targets. We saw last week, right, when the game script went against them, he got 15 targets. And I don't know, call me crazy. I think the game script might go against the Panthers a little bit, and they'll be forced to pass in this game as well. Moore looks pretty legit to me, but you think there's a little bit of regression coming?
Yeah, I do. So since week 5, he ranks 8th among all wide receivers in XFP per game, 14th in actual fantasy points per game. So there's a little bit of difference there. What's causing it? It's all touchdown luck. And, when it's not touchdowns, it's this guy's inefficient. When it is touchdowns, it's this guy's unlucky. And all the data backs that up. And he's just been unlucky. Factor that in, he'd be averaging 18.2 fantasy points per game. The yardage has been there with 3 straight weeks with 95 plus receiving yards. He's a top regression candidate. He's a bit underpriced and should be a good matchup if Marshawn Lattimore's out again next week.
Yeah, even if you can't afford like the Julio or Michael Thomas to sort of anchor your wide receiver crew, I think DJ Moore is probably a pretty good way to start that off this week. All right, let's move to wide receiver again, guys. Don't forget, if you are on the YouTubes, click like, That helps us out over there. If you want to get notified every time RotoGrinders goes live, click subscribe. You can do that right from the Grinders Live page as well. All right, let's move into some wide receiver talk. And outside of Julio or Michael Thomas, right? Julio's 8K, Michael Thomas is 9,300. And, I was looking at some projections. I look at the blitz here on RotoGrinders. Michael Thomas, normally he has the highest fantasy point, projection. But this week so far, he not only is he the highest projected, he's also the best value wide receiver point per dollar at just 9,300 because you got to give him damn near 30 fantasy points, which really puts him at a good point per dollar. Is this something we continue to expect where Michael Thomas just continually gets 10 to 15 targets every single week? It doesn't matter what happens in the game. It seems to me like it's Michael Thomas, it's Alvin Kamara, and that's who Drew Brees likes to throw the ball to.
Yeah, he's, firmly in the MVP consideration. He's crushing it. What I will say is that no comparison, Julio Jones is the guy I'm playing this week. Mm-hmm. James Bradbury's back. Last year, Michael Thomas totaled 49 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 29 yards and 0 touchdowns against James Bradbury and the Panthers last season. And then Julio Jones, it's just the eruption spot.
So Jones, Tampa Bay, you're keeping. So in your mind, you're getting the better player and you're saving $1,300 on DraftKings.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if you want me to go into this Julio Jones matchup or not, but I've just been, locking in wide receiver ones versus Tampa Bay all season, and it's just been money. So they've given up 25 or more fantasy points per game to eight wide receiver this season. It's twice as many as the next closest defense against wide receivers who rank top 25 in fantasy points per game. So that's Thomas, Lockett, Kupp, Kirk, Shepard. Those wide receivers are averaging 33.1 fantasy points per game. In 14 career games against Tampa, Jones averages 24.2 or 27.3 in his last 5. This is just a smash spot. Calvin Ridley's a good play too. Tampa has just the worst secondary in the league, and by a significant margin. And they just don't seem to care. They're not double covering wide receiver ones. They're just like, whatever.
Whatever, go have huge game after huge game. I mean, if it's that easy for fantasy, maybe we really shouldn't think twice about it.
There just hasn't been a case where that's failed at all this season or even come close to failing.
All right, let's talk a couple of value plays out there. So I want to ask you, this might be a little off your board. You're not prepared for it, but Tim Patrick, you want to have a little conversation? You need value this week, right? He's 3K on DraftKings, Scott. Literally minimum price, 8 targets the week he comes back from IR. Deshaun Hamilton didn't even get a target. It's Sutton, it's Patrick, it was Fant last week, getting all of the targets. Now, it's against Buffalo. They're a little tough to pass on the outside. But is this going to be a viable play? I feel like his ownership's going to sort of spike up throughout the week because whenever we see minimum price receivers that get targets, we fall in love with them as DFS players.
So I probably won't play him at all. I will say he has the backup connection working in his favor, and we've proven for DFS that that's a great way to find value, and it works and it's real. At the same time, I will say 91% of his yardage came on deep passes, and Buffalo for the 3rd consecutive season, this is a scheme thing, is the best defense in the league on deep passes. I also just don't like Brandon Allen. I just refuse to trust him. I will say Noah Fant, he's seen great volume since the Emmanuel Sanders trade. Courtland Sutton's playing like a wide receiver 1. He ranks top 7 in PFF grade. He ranks 4th in yardage market share. Again, it's Brandon Allen in a bad matchup though.
Yeah, Sutton's like he's a wide receiver 1. Honestly, I feel like if he had a real quarterback, I mean, we would be talking about him maybe not
quite
in
the breakout.
Yeah, not in the Julio Jones or Michael Thomas, but basically that next tier of wide receiver. So, all right. So I teased this a little bit earlier. Right? I'm going to dust off. I like those Millionaire Maker articles, right? I do those on RotoGrinders. I'm going to dust off a 3-time Millionaire Maker winner last year, and I'm going to go to some of his targets this week. Do you know who I would be talking about?
I do not.
How about some Mitchell Trubisky, Scott?
Whoa!
Look at this. He won the Millionaire.
My.
He won the Millionaire Maker 3 times last year. He had the hip injury, right? That's just like the mercy, right? You suck so bad. We're going to tell the world you have a little bit of an injury to write it off. But he's coming back, and it doesn't get much better than the Giants secondary. You got Allen Robinson was shut down a little bit last week. With who was that? Jalen Ramsey sort of shadowing him around. They let Taylor Gabriel and Anthony Millard Undertaker gift, right? He came back from the dead and had himself a good game. Can I interest you in maybe some Mitchell Trubisky stacks? And all these guys are a little bit too cheap if you think Chicago is going to be able to pass on the Giants this week.
Yeah, so I will say if you think Chicago leans pass heavy, he's a great, kind of YOLO tournament play. The Giants rank second worst in yards per attempt allowed, third worst in fantasy points per dropback allowed. But teams are running on them a bit, so they rank a little bit lower in fantasy points per game. And that could be a David Montgomery play, who's a guy who's just as gross to play as Trubisky, but he does see really good volume in games with good game script. That's been proven. Also ranks really highly in expected touchdown market share, and Vegas thinks Chicago has their best offensive game of the season this week.
Yeah,
yes.
So I like this Chicago offense. Montgomery, I don't know if this is the Trubisky, Millionaire Maker from last year, but if there was a get right spot, I think this could be it for the Bears offense against the Giants. So just keep them in your back pocket, guys. If you're looking for some low-owned tournament plays across the board, Trubisky, Montgomery, take your pick of a couple of the wide receivers, right? With Burton went to IR, so I think it's going to be really concentrated to the wide receivers now. So
you know what's interesting too?
What do you got for me?
Teams have run quarterbacks have run on the Giants a total of 45 times, which ranks second most. Maybe Trubisky just
that's just disappeared yardage from his game this year. So I hope maybe it comes
you'll need
back
that
this week.
You'll need that if you want to win the Millie with him.
Yeah. So that's one of my calls of the week here. So all right, let's go.
Here's the real question though.
Yep.
What's more likely? Trubisky gets benched before the second half, or he finishes as a QB1,
like top 10 quarterback, or gets benched, or like
bench versus top 5 quarterback. How about that? I think that's like even odds.
This week, I'm going to say the Giants are bad enough. He has the ceiling to get the top 5. You put him in a bad matchup. I mean, he's not very far away from getting the hook. If he comes out and throws like 2 picks in this first half, and it's like 7-0, and the Bears can win the game, I think they go to Chase Daniel. So I think you could have a legitimate argument there. Anything else at receiver? It's a really ugly slate, I think, overall, and the wide receiver pricing's pretty tight until you get, to some more questionable plays. I mean, Jamison Crowder, right? We mentioned how he needs to score touchdowns, and I know he's been doing good, but he's 6,200 on DraftKings. Terry McLaurin, with probably not even a really good quarterback throwing him the ball anymore, still
Darius Slay too. You're not going to play McLaurin this week.
Yeah, it's just like all the receivers you might want to play, they're all probably priced a little bit too expensive. Is there any other matchups really sticking out to you?
I will just say with Jamison Crowder, I know he looks expensive, but if you look at the numbers, he's not. Since games with Sam Darnold under center, he's averaging 8.4 targets per game, 16 fantasy points per game. That would rank 15th among wide receivers. Also, coincidentally, this is Crowder's best matchup with Darnold under center. Oakland ranks bottom 10 in fantasy points per game allowed to slot wide receivers. Otherwise, he's had the toughest matchup for any slot wide receiver. Again, games with Darnold, every other defense ranks top 12 to slot wide receiver. So this would be his best matchup. But like you said, he's not as good of a play as he's been the past 2 weeks. He's a little expensive.
Any of the Pittsburgh wide receivers, or I think maybe we'll talk about a Pittsburgh tight end, but looks like Deontay Johnson might end up playing. He's 5,100. James Washington's 5,000. Right? They like all the guys you might theoretically want to play. They're all just sort of priced up a couple $100 too much in my book.
Yeah, I mean, if Juju and Deontay are out, James Washington for sure. No, there was another sort of no-name guy who saw good volume last week, but just gross. You have like a lot of these, values in receivers tethered to bad backup quarterbacks. And I don't know. I'm probably just not going there.
All right. And then the game of the week, you got to lean Dallas at New England, right? New England sort of faltered a little bit. Tom Brady's chucking the ball. He's the only other quarterback in the league than Jameis Winston throwing the ball 40-plus times a game so far this season. How do you see this game? This Dallas offense looks so good. The New England Patriots have sort of faltered a little bit here. You got anything going in this game? A lot of eyeballs on this game on Sunday.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is Dallas has the 8th lowest implied point total of the week. They're below Buffalo, Indianapolis, the Jets.
That's that New England defense home field playing right there.
Yeah, I know. I kind of want to go contrarian and think the surprise some people, but again, at the same time, you're right. It is, this ferocious Patriots defense. I mean, Vegas does think New England scores a lot of points, but at the same time, you have Tom Brady who doesn't look good and is admitting, he's playing it safe this year as a quarterback. He's kind of regressed into Alex Smith mode. I don't know. I don't really know what to make of this game if I'm being honest. I probably need to do a little more research. I will say Julian Edelman, who's seeing top 3 volume, producing top 12, has another brutal matchup. He had the worst possible matchup last week. He has the probably second most difficult matchup for a slot wide receiver this week.
Even if, there's a lot of up in the air on this wide receiver crew. Sanu, something with his ankle. Dorsett didn't practice yet. Even without some of those guys, you still sort of shy away. 6,900, nice price on Edelman there.
Yeah. It's just don't like the matchup. I'll probably look elsewhere.
All right, let's go to tight end. So we mentioned, right, maybe you don't like Wentz, and I asked you, hey, with just Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert, is that enough to get it done? The problem with Ertz is he's $6,000, again, on a week where if you want Christian McCaffrey, you got to spend, over 50% of or 20% of your salary to get him at 10.5. So Ertz back-to-back 11 target games. And, that's what happens when you lose Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson. Ertz gets peppered with these short intermediate targets and he just racks it up. The Seattle defense isn't that great. They've sort of limited tight ends a little bit, but as a whole, their pass rush graded 30th as a unit on PFF, 19th in pass coverage. I think you can even look at Goddard a little bit more if he continues to get touchdowns. Well, you score a touchdown as a tight end in 2019, you're basically a top 10 or 8 play on the week anyway. So 6,000 for Ertz. Can we stomach that?
Yeah. So I think that's a little too cheap. I will also say it's a good matchup on paper for sure. Seattle's giving up the 6th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to tight ends. And that would jump to 2nd most if Mark Andrews didn't drop 4 passes against them. But at the same time, I think Seattle's smart enough to do what a lot of teams have done, which is, just sell out to stop Ertz is the one guy you have to worry about. Darren Waller is, I think, the same price on FanDuel, which makes him
I'd play Ertz 100 out of 100 times over Waller right now.
Ooh, wow. I think it's a little closer. After that, I don't know. Tight ends gross.
Yeah, let's have some fun here. Let's play the what have you done for me lately tight ends. Are you ready? So Jacob Hollister or Ryan Griffin?
Hollister for sure.
All right. So Griffin had the huge game. last week, right? 5 for 5, 109 yards and the touchdown. Hollister, though, back-to-back huge games with big volume. I think Seattle might be getting a tight end back. Who is Ed Dixon? He's more of a blocker than Hollister, and we've seen Wilson. He's wanted to, he had Disley. Now it's Hollister. He sort of likes the tight end this year.
Oh, Ed Dixon is coming back this week?
I think so.
Yeah, it looks like it. They activated him from IR on Wednesday.
Yeah, I mean, I don't expect Dixon to really eat up a lot of pass play work for Hollister, but I think Hollister's a pretty good play. Here's another one for you. Do you want Greg Olsen and the pass script possibly against New Orleans, or can I interest you in Noah Fant and his 11 targets last week?
Oh, man. I'll say Fant. New Orleans has had one of the toughest defenses against tight ends for like 3 years now.
All right, David Njoku, if he comes back from IR, or Vance will make it Dance McDonald at 3,500.
Vance for sure, given the injuries elsewhere.
Yeah, they're the same price. And then final question. Is this OJ Howard nonsense? Is he like straight not going to see the field anymore and Cameron Brate's going to get 100 targets a game? Do we have just one tight end now that we can play?
So I have no way of knowing that, but what's really interesting is not only did Brate see this like amazing volume, but if you combined the volume for every tight end on Tampa Bay every single week, Brate's volume last week was twice as good as any other week Brate and Howard combined, and like 3 or 4 times their average. So like Brate's not a play, basically. It just looks super anomalistic.
Yeah, is it a one game sample? Is it a trend that we can look into, right? Is Evans and Godwin sort of lost a little bit of volume because Brate and Ronald Jones were getting targets all of a sudden, right? Like it's really hard to read the tea leaves on what's actually going on in Tampa Bay, if you ask me.
So I'm saying even if OJ Howard's benched, like you shouldn't expect – I don't think you should expect another game like that.
All right. Anyone else at tight end? You got anything? I mean, you scroll down, the names just get worse and worse, and I think we talked about most of the quality guys here. Maybe Jared Cook.
Yeah, maybe.
But we literally talked about every single tight end at the top of the DraftKings pricing pool.
I mean, Evan Ingram, if he comes back, I think is a solid play.
Yeah, he's 5,200. So I think that's going to get it done again, guys. If you do like what we've been talking about, not just on this show, but any show here at RotoGrinders, click the like and subscribe buttons over on YouTube, and come on over to RotoGrinders as well. You can participate in the chat on most of the shows, not this one, but with some of the experts and things like that along the way. Scott, dude, this is fun. You know, I know you're a busy man. I know you get worked like a dog over at PFF. But dude, you got to come on the show a couple more times.
You're right. I missed you, Brett.
It's fun, and I'll let you know. Daniel's been doing a pretty kick-ass job filling in for you.
Glad to hear it.
All right, so that's going to about do it for this week's Pro Football Focus show. Scott, it was fun having you back. I'll see you. Hey, you never know what the cards may hold. Maybe we'll see you again soon. Thanks to all you for watching live. If you've been listening on the podcast as well, thanks for listening over there. He's Scott, I'm Britt, and we out, y'all.